Okay, did the Confederate Secret Service assassinate Abraham Lincoln? We know they were involved on the periphery of the conspiracy, but we do not know to what extent. This kind of quest began for me when I wrote a book entitled Richard Taylor and the Red River Campaign. There was a man named John R. Stevenson who was director of the Louisiana State Bank, which was behind Union lines. He got permission to sell 19,000 bales of cotton. A bale of cotton weighs about 400 pounds. Price during the war went up from 6 cents a pound to $1.09 a pound. He obtained Union permission to buy it from the Confederate Cotton Bureau of the Trans-Mississippi Department, transport it from Confederate to Union lines, and then ship it to Europe, where he made a lot of money. The permit for this was signed by Abraham Lincoln himself. And it turned out that John Stevenson was a captain in the Confederate Secret Service. He never made a dime off this himself, apparently. He put all the money in Confederate Treasury accounts, and it was used to buy munitions and supplies for the Confederate Army. Now, the details of this shady transaction are lost in the mists of history. Exactly how did he get Lincoln's signature, we don't know. But it does indicate the Confederate Secret Service was working very efficiently in Louisiana. Certainly it did for General Richard Taylor, who got the Union plans well in advance from one of his shady sources. Nathan Bedford Forrest certainly benefited from this organization. In December of 1862, he crossed the Tennessee River in one of the most successful raids of the war, but he was ill-equipped and was virtually out of percussion caps. No matter, as soon as he crossed the river, he was met by a Secret Service operative who delivered to him tens of thousands of percussion caps. We don't know who this man is. My attempts to find out yielded absolutely nothing. He delivered the materials and vanished. And you find this again and again and again. With Forrest, one Union general whined, "We never know where Forrest is or what he intends to do, but he always knows where we are and what we propose to do." One of the most successful spies in all of history was Rose Greenhow. She worked for the Confederate Secret Service. She delivered, or had delivered to Jefferson Davis, the Union plans for the Battle of the First Manassas, or Bull Run. It enabled the Confederates to react quickly, and instead of meeting one Confederate army, as the Northern planners had expected, they met two and were defeated. And Jefferson Davis later gave Rose Greenhow credit for winning the first Battle of Bull Run. Later, she was killed in an operation for the Confederate Secret Service. We know the Confederate Secret Service was operating on the periphery of the Lincoln assassination. We just don't know how deep it was. We know that John Wilkes Booth received from the Confederate Secret Service the modern equivalent of $40,000 for expenses. So he was in contact with them. John Surratt, who was deeply involved in the plot to kidnap Lincoln, was a courier for the Confederate Secret Service for 3 years. His mother ran a safe house for the Confederate Secret Service. And when the Yankees couldn't find John Surratt, they hung his mother. Lewis Powell, who almost succeeded in killing Secretary of State Seward, was a member of the Secret Service. He was detached by John Singleton Mosby, the great ghost of the Confederacy, who worked with the Confederate Secret Service on the Lincoln kidnapping plot. So we know that the Confederate Secret Service was on the edge of the Lincoln assassination. We just don't know how deeply it was involved. And that frustrated me as a historian for a while until I stopped and thought about it. But if a historian can trace the activities of a Secret Service 150 years after it ceases to exist, you don't have to ask, was it any good or not? You know it wasn't worth a hoot. And the Confederate Secret Service was very good. It had an estimated 1,200 members. Most of these were highly educated. Most of them spoke more than one language, and most of them had money. And this operation, I think, rather proves that. Of course, that's the difference in a history book and a novel. In a history book, you have to connect the dots, and I couldn't do that. If I'd been a district attorney, I would have enough information against the Secret Service to get an indictment, but I could not have gotten a conviction. But novels are governed by their own rules. And that was the genesis of this book. In my novel, the Confederate Secret Service is involved in it up to its neck. And I think it was, working in cahoots with Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, who was known to dabble in the shady world of espionage and sabotage. There are too many things that just don't add up. And that was brought to me, my attention when I read about a visit two of Robert Todd Lincoln's friends made to his Vermont estate years after the war. He had been Secretary of War under Garfield and Arthur. And they went into his den and found him burning some of his father's papers, Abraham Lincoln's papers. And the two men, one of whom was the president of Columbia University, said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because I found evidence of treason in my father's cabinet." They said, "Don't burn the papers." And he said, "Why shouldn't I burn the papers?" And his visitor said, "For the sake of history." And Mr. Lincoln said, "Yes, for the sake of history." And he tossed another sheet of paper on to the fire. So who was he referring to when he said there was evidence of treason in his father's cabinet? Well, Edwin Stanton is the logical candidate. Some of his actions in the Lincoln assassination are difficult to explain. For example, Abraham Lincoln, on the last day of his life, April 14th, 1865, visited Stanton. He wanted a bodyguard. He was going to Ford's Theater, and he wanted Thomas Eckhart to accompany him. Eckhart worked for Stanton and was head of the telegraph office. He was an immensely big and powerful man, strongly devoted to Lincoln. Lincoln once said that he saw Eckhart break 5 iron bars over his arm, one right after another. He was immensely big and powerful. And had he been the bodyguard that night at Ford's Theater, I don't believe there's any way the assassination could have been carried out. But Stanton refused to release Eckhart. He said he has valuable work for me, and I can't let him go. And Lincoln left disappointed. 15 minutes after Lincoln left, Stanton called Eckhart in and said, "I don't have anything for you to do tonight. You can go home. I won't need you till tomorrow." When Congress investigated this, Stanton said that the last time he saw Abraham Lincoln was April 12th, not the 14th, and that there had been no request for Eckhart. Why would he lie? He lied to Congress. He lied to the people. He lied to Lincoln. I think he knew more than we would ever know. After the assassination, he acquired Booth's diary. And when he gave it back to the investigators, 18 pages had been torn out and were missing. And Stanton said they were missing when he received the diary. But Lawrence Baker, who was the head of the National Detective Police, said, no, that wasn't true. All the pages of the diary were there when Stanton received it. Later, it was put in a filing cabinet in the War Department and disappeared altogether. We don't have Booth's diary. Things like that just, like I say, don't add up. In fact, right after Lincoln was shot, they took him to a hotel. Strangely enough, it was a boarding house that in the very same room that John Wilkes Booth had once rented. And the stenographer who was taking depositions said he had enough information on John Wilkes Booth in 15 minutes to have him hanged. But Stanton delayed 24 hours before he sent anyone after John Wilkes Booth. Had Booth, when he leaped from the stage after shooting Lincoln, he broke his leg. If it hadn't been for that, I believe he would have gotten away. But that slowed him up considerably, and they finally caught up with him and killed him. Like I said, there's a lot of things in the Lincoln assassination that don't add up. That's the great thing about writing a novel. You can add them up yourself. You don't have to have the historic documentation that I do in my other book. It's a rather interesting thing about the Confederate Secret Service. It did not cease to operate just because the Confederacy ceased to exist. It continued to operate in Canada for several months after the war. One of the objectives they had was to prevent the indictment of Jefferson Davis for crimes. And the man behind this was a fellow named George Sanders. He was a scoundrel. He could associate with whores and debutantes, lawmen and outlaws, Yankees and Confederates, all with equal adroitness. And he acquired three so-called witnesses to the Confederate Secret Service and Jefferson Davis plotting to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. One was Dr. Charles Merritt. The other was a man whose real name was Dunham. He went by the alias of Conover. He was a well-known swindler. And Richard Montgomery, who was a spy for both sides in the war. And they went to the what would now be called a special prosecutor and gave him all sorts of stories about secret meetings with Jefferson Davis and the assassins of Abraham Lincoln, including John Wilkes Booth and Colonel Jason Thompson and others. Secret handshakes, midnight rendezvous, codes and ciphers. And the special prosecutor bought all this and put them on the witness stand and got their testimony. And they thought they had a pretty good case against Davis. But thanks to Sanders' efforts, the testimony was leaked out. It was a secret trial. But the newspaper editors were demanding it be made public, and it was made public. And it turns out it didn't add up. On days that Jefferson Davis was supposed to be meeting with Robert E. Lee and John Wilkes Booth and other characters of this nature. He was supposed to be meeting them in Richmond. He was in Montgomery or Atlanta or some other location. Could not possibly have met on that day. Booth was supposed to have met with Confederate cabinet members. He was giving a performance in New York City, hundreds of miles away. The testimony was obviously false, and it compromised the testimony of others who actually were telling the truth. Loyal Union people who were supposed to have met with Booth or some agent of the Confederate Secret Service, and they honestly testified, I never met this guy. The result was the entire case against Jefferson Davis came unraveled. And President Andrew Johnson basically said, called the whole thing off, and he released Jefferson Davis. And Johnson hated Jefferson Davis. They had personal animosity dating back to long before the war. But I think that was the last major operation of the Confederate Secret Service. He was released in 1867 and was never brought to trial. Anyway, that's kind of a quick overview. It's a story of the Secret Service and how they were involved in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and I think they were. They also attempted to assassinate William Seward, the Secretary of State. Lewis Powell did that. He was sent to the Secret Service by John Singleton Mosby, the Gray Ghost of the Confederacy, and he sliced up the secretary pretty good. He cut his cheek so badly you could see Seward's tongue through the outside of his cheek. Powell thought he was going to die, and he almost did. He never was right again. Also, they had planned to assassinate Vice President Johnson, but George Azerodt was a German from Tübingen. He decided that he had signed up for a kidnapping and not a murder. So he went to the bar and got drunk and did not assassinate Johnson. Buttling, that's another one of the pieces that don't add up. I get into it in the book. I don't want to give too much away.